History is written by the victors, but it's paid for by their bankers. You've heard of the Rothschilds, who financed empires from the shadows of the 19th century. You've heard of the Medici, who used their ledgers to ignite the Renaissance. But the family that wrote the playbook for both of them, the dynasty that perfected the art of turning money into absolute power, has been almost erased from history. And that was by design. They were a family from a small German city who amassed a fortune so vast it was equal to 2% of Europe's entire GDP. They didn't just lend money to kings, they owned them. They didn't just bank for the Pope. They controlled the financial machinery of the Vatican itself. They decided who would be emperor, they financed the wars that tore Europe apart, and they profited from the very corruption that triggered the Protestant Reformation. This is the story of the Fugger family, the first global capitalists, the original puppet masters, and if you've never heard of them, it's because their story reveals a terrifying truth about the world we live in, that for the last 500 years, the real power has never been in the throne room. It's been in the counting house. To understand the rise of the Fuggers, you have to understand the world they were born into. The late 15th century was an age of chaos and opportunity. The old medieval order was dying, and a new world of global trade and gunpowder armies was being born. Europe was a fractured chessboard of petty kingdoms and city-states, all dominated by two great powers, the papacy in Rome and the sprawling, messy Holy Roman Empire. Both were hungry for one thing: cash. Kings and princes needed money for their new, expensive armies. The Pope needed money for his lavish building projects and political schemes, but the financial system was primitive. Gold and silver were scarce. Lending was risky. The great Italian banks, like the Medici, were powerful, but they were starting to decline, tangled in local politics. The real wealth, the raw material of power, wasn't in Florence anymore. It was deep underground, in the silver and copper mines of Central Europe, and in the small German city of Augsburg. A weaver's son, named Jakob Fugger, understood something that no one else did. Whoever controlled the metals controlled the money, and whoever controlled the money could control the world. Jakob Fugger was not a nobleman. He had no titles, no ancient bloodline. He was trained as a merchant in Venice, where he saw firsthand the power of Italian finance. But he also saw its weakness. The Italians were masters of ledgers and loans. But Jakob realized the real money wasn't in moving numbers around. It was in controlling the physical assets that gave those numbers value. He returned to Augsburg with a revolutionary idea. He wouldn't just be a banker. He would be an industrialist, a miner, a logistician, and a lender all at once. He would create a vertically integrated empire of money, from the moment the silver was dug out of the ground to the moment it was stamped into a coin and handed to an emperor. Jakob Fugger, who would become known as Jakob the Rich, began his conquest not in a bank, but in a mine. He started making loans to the cash-strapped rulers of Tyrol, a region rich in silver and copper. But these weren't ordinary loans. Instead of demanding repayment in cash, Jakob demanded the rights to the mines themselves. He took control of their output, their operations, their entire future production. His rivals thought he was insane, taking on the risk of managing a dirty, dangerous mining operation. But Jakob saw the masterstroke. He was cutting out the middleman. He now controlled the supply of the two most important metals in Europe. He could set the price. He created a continent-wide copper cartel, crushing his competition. When the King of Hungary needed a loan, Jakob took control of the largest copper mines in the world. While other bankers were trading paper promises, Jakob Fugger was trading real, tangible wealth. He owned the raw material of the entire European economy. But controlling the supply was only the first step. Jakob then built a logistical network to move his metals and a financial network to leverage their value. He established branches in every major European city, from Lisbon to Budapest. And, crucially, he created something else, the world's first private intelligence service. His agents, stationed across the continent, didn't just handle accounts, they gathered information. They reported on political tensions, crop failures, the health of kings, and rumors of war. This information was compiled into handwritten newsletters, the Fuggersite canon, and sent back to Jakob in Augsburg. He had perfect information. He knew which duke was on the verge of bankruptcy, which king was planning an invasion, and which market was ripe for a monopoly, often weeks or months before anyone else. In an age of slow, unreliable communication, this intelligence network was a weapon of immense power. It allowed him to anticipate risks and seize opportunities with terrifying speed and precision. He controlled the metal, he controlled the trade routes, and he controlled the information. Now, he was ready to buy a crown. In 1519, the most powerful position in the Christian world was up for grabs. Holy Roman Emperor, the two main candidates were King Francis I of France and King Charles I of Spain. The emperor wasn't chosen by birthright. He was chosen by 7 German prince-electors, and in 1519, those 7 votes were for sale to the highest bidder. It was the most expensive and corrupt election in European history. Francis of France launched a campaign of lavish bribery, promising the electors a fortune. It looked like he was going to win, but the young King Charles of Spain had a secret weapon. Charles was a Habsburg, a family the Fuggers had been carefully cultivating for years. Jakob saw that a Habsburg emperor, who also controlled Spain and its vast new territories in the Americas, would be the ultimate client. He decided that Charles had to win at any cost. So, he unleashed his treasury. When the French offered a bribe, Fugger offered a bigger one. He flooded the electoral states with money, promising the electors a staggering 543,000 gold florins. But he did something even more clever. He didn't just promise the money, he had his agents deliver promissory notes legally binding contracts for payment that the electors could cash the moment. They cast their vote for Charles. It was an offer they couldn't refuse. Charles I of Spain became Emperor Charles V, the most powerful man in the world. But he wasn't really the emperor. He was Jakob Fugger's emperor. He owed his crown, his power, and his future to the banker from Augsburg, and the debt was enormous. Charles V would spend his entire reign fighting wars across Europe, and every single one of them would be financed by Fugger loans. The Habsburg dynasty, which would dominate Europe for 2 centuries, was built on a foundation of Fugger silver. Jakob Fugger had proven that a banker's ledger was more powerful than a king's sword. He had purchased an empire. But he wasn't done. His next target was even bigger: the papacy. The Vatican, in the early 16th century, was a business, and business was good. Pope Leo X, a member of the Medici family, was trying to build the magnificent St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, a project of immense cost. To raise the money, he authorized a massive Europe-wide sale of indulgences. An indulgence was a piece of paper, signed by the Pope, that promised to reduce a person's time in purgatory. You could buy one for yourself, or for a dead relative. It was, essentially, a get-out-of-hell-free card, and the church was selling them by the thousands. But this created a huge logistical problem. How do you collect millions of coins from peasants in every corner of Germany and securely transfer that wealth to Rome? You hire the Fuggers. Jakob Fugger became the chief financial agent for the indulgence trade. His network was the perfect machine for the job. A German priest would sell the indulgences, and a Fugger agent would be sitting right next to him to collect the cash. The money would enter the Fugger system, and the Pope would get his cut in Rome. But here's the secret part of the deal. The local Archbishop Albrecht of Mainz had gone deep into debt to the Fuggers to buy his position from the Pope. So, the deal was structured like this. Half of the indulgence money would go to the Pope to build St. Peter's. The other half would go directly to the Fugger Bank to pay off Archbishop Albrecht's loan. The Fuggers were profiting at every level. They were profiting from the loan to the Archbishop, and they were taking a commission on every single indulgence sold. It was this blatant commercial sale of salvation, managed by the Fuggers' agents, that finally pushed a German monk named Martin Luther to nail his 95 Theses to a church door. The Protestant Reformation, the cataclysm that shattered Christendom forever, was ignited by a financial scheme designed to enrich the Fugger Bank. Jakob Fugger wasn't just financing kings, he was financing the very system of corruption that would tear the religious world apart, and he was profiting from it all. At the time of his death in 1525, Jakob Fugger was the richest man in the world. His nephew, Anton Fugger, inherited the empire and continued to expand it. The Fugger Bank was now the central bank of Europe, financing the Habsburgs' wars against France, the Ottoman Turks, and the Protestant princes in Germany. But they had made a fatal mistake, the same mistake that had destroyed the great Florentine banks before them. They had tied their entire fortune to a single, all-powerful client. The Habsburg kings of Spain were the best customers a bank could ever have, but they were also the most dangerous. King Philip II of Spain, Charles V's son, inherited a vast empire and an even vaster pile of debt. He was constantly at war, and he paid for it by borrowing relentlessly from the Fuggers. But the flood of silver from the New World, which should have made Spain rich, only fueled inflation and reckless spending. In 1557, Philip II did what overextended kings always do. He defaulted. He declared a state bankruptcy, effectively erasing a huge portion of his debts to the Fuggers. It was a catastrophic blow. The Fuggers were forced to write off millions. They survived, but they were never the same. Spain would declare bankruptcy 3 more times over the next century, and each time, it bled the Fugger fortune dry. The family that had built its empire on controlling real assets had become trapped by paper promises from a client that was too big to fail and too powerful to pay. The Fuggers slowly faded from the world stage. Their wealth declined, their political influence vanished, and their name was forgotten, replaced by new dynasties like the Rothschilds. But their legacy is the world we now inhabit. They were the pioneers of global capitalism. They invented the concept of the multinational corporation. They perfected the art of corporate lobbying, buying political influence to create monopolies. And they showed with terrifying clarity how an unelected, unaccountable financial power could become the secret government, directing the fate of nations from the shadows. Every time a massive bank is declared too big to fail, every time a corporation funds a political campaign to get favorable laws, every time a government goes deep into debt to finance a war, they are running a play from the Fugger playbook. The Fuggers are gone, but the system they created is still here. It runs our world, and it reminds us that history is a relentless story of power, and that power, more often than not, belongs to the person you owe money to. The names on the thrones change, the flags of the empires fall, but the power of the ledger endures. The story of the Fuggers isn't just history, it's a warning. If this gave you a new perspective, hit subscribe. The most important stories are the ones that have been deliberately forgotten.